Winter in Britain can be pretty bleak and grey. No wonder many think about leaving. But British ingenuity has designed this all year round strawberry growing facility. Artificial light powered by renewable energy. And this impressive mechanism to ensure that plants get optimal access to light. No more expensive imports, no need for pesticides or even back-breaking migrant labour, because let's be honest, few native British workers aspire to work in farms picking fruit, and you can't rely on migrants forever. Now, a cynic might point out that billionaire James Dyson got into farming to avoid inheritance tax, but cynicism aside, this is the kind of innovation Britain is still good at, like the world's only rotating boat lift in Falkirk, Scotland. Now, when I asked my subscribers what they thought Britain was still good at, the top 4 answers were shafting the mugs who pay taxes, making a mess of infrastructure, wasting talent, pessimism and roast potatoes. So who would have thought that the best thing about Britain is British food? I think comedy and sarcasm were also pretty high up on the list too. But talking of potatoes, one great British institution, the allotment. Grow your own food. It's at least one way to avoid food inflation. Now, the UK has a long history of innovation. Alexander Fleming and penicillin, Tim Berners-Lee and the World Wide Web, and also noteworthy, Berners-Lee gave away the World Wide Web for free. And these days, with good academic research, the UK has a strong biotech sector, which has seen rapid growth in the past 15 years, a major destination for global venture capital funding. The UK is relatively good at early stage innovation, but less successful taking it to the market, with large US firms tending to dominate. And actually it's a similar story with the tech industry too. The UK has a lot of good tech ideas. DeepMind, a pioneer of AI, but in 2014 sold to Google for £400 million. In fact, the UK being bought up by foreign private equity is a growing trend. At least the finance sector get a commission on selling off Britain. But anyway, life sciences and biotech is a source of growth, especially in the Oxford-London-Cambridge corridor, which has good universities and skilled labour. According to QS World Rankings, 4 out of the top 10 universities are British. The only problem is that trying to grow the economy in tiny cities where housing costs are over 11 times average is very difficult. There's potential for growth, but who can afford to live there? But whilst investment decisions in Britain are often focused on the south, the UK has huge untapped potential in the north. The Northern Arc, the area around Liverpool and Manchester, extending across to Leeds if there were better transport links. And this is an area of great innovation and economic diversity. It also has much cheaper housing costs. A family home in Cambridge may set you back 1.3 million. You can get a house on the Wirral for 300,000. Relatively good housing, but still good enough rail links to get you into those major growing cities. And if we can forget about HS2 for a moment, ironically Britain is still benefiting from the Victorian capacity to build things. The Victorians built many of the reservoirs and sewers which we still use today. They even correctly anticipated a future increase in capacity, the kind of long-term thinking which isn't always so fashionable today. Now true, health and safety was somewhat more lax in those days, and Brunel didn't have to contend with legislation to protect bats on the Great Western Railway, but they did succeed in building an enormous rail network in record time. And we did our best to destroy a rail network in the 1960s. But despite cutbacks, privatisation, record ticket prices and leaves on the line, passenger numbers have reached record levels. British Railways is certainly not the envy of the world anymore. In the time taken to build 220 kilometres of HS2, China has built literally tens of thousands of kilometres at a fraction of the cost. But no matter how much China builds and manufactures, who would willingly swap a life in broken Britain for surveillance state China? Not me. But going back to the Victorians, in a time of wealth, the country built bridges, reservoirs, railways and buildings which are still helping the country today. Of course, we did have that manic period of demolishing some of those beautiful Victorian buildings, replacing them with modern monstrosities like Euston Station. But the worst excesses of modernist architecture have been curtailed. Thank you, Prince Charles. The modern skyline of London is actually pretty impressive. Though, if you do scan away from London to those left behind towns, the high street can be more of a depressing collection of empty shops pawnbrokers and gambling shops, with about the highest value coming from pound shops. The high street has seen better days, but let's leave that for another day. Now, if we look at statistics, the UK's top exports are cars, power generators, pharmaceuticals and aircraft. Rolls-Royce engines for aeroplanes are some of the UK's best high-end manufacturing. The UK car industry, a bit of a joke in the 1970s, but investment from Germany and Japan has helped turn it around, with the likes of Nissan in Sunderland and Jaguar Land Rover in the West Midlands. But despite being the UK's top export, the UK car industry has had torrid few years, with production well down, hit by Brexit, declining competitiveness and high energy costs. Now, the UK's top export destinations are Europe and the United States. Good job we didn't damage our access to a single market on our doorstep, especially since Mr. Tariffman has somewhat curtailed the dream of a US free trade deal. But this video is an effort to be more positive about the UK economy, so let's not forget the bonanza of negotiating free trade deals with Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Australia and New Zealand. Latest trade deals will boost GDP by around 0.3%. The great British free trade economists Adam Smith and David Ricardo will be proud. Now, the biggest employer is the NHS, over 2 million people in 2024. Now, a cynic might argue this reflects the fact Britain is becoming increasingly unhealthy, but for all the stresses, waiting lists and complaints, the NHS is still pretty good. It provides a good, decent, universal service under difficult conditions. It is something to be proud of. The second biggest employer is the Department for Work and Pensions. We nearly have as many civil servants for welfare as people in the British Army. Perhaps to get defence spending to 4% of GDP, we'll have to do some creative accounting. But trade isn't just about goods. The UK's speciality is really in more intangible cultural exports, and here the UK still retains an outsized influence. The Beatles literally changed the world, and UK music is still a growth area. In 2023, it added 7.6 billion of gross value added to the UK economy, 13% growth from the previous year. Exports were 4.6 billion, not bad for an age of free digital downloads. British comedy is another successful export, everything from Mr. Bean to Fawlty Towers and Blackadder. The economy may be failing, the economy may be going to pot, but rather than riot, British papers turn the Prime Minister into a lettuce to see which will last the longest. It was actually the lettuce which won in the end. But in fact, for all the discontent bubbling under the surface, Britain is a relatively stable country with stable institutions, and that still counts for something. The last revolution was 1688, and it was more about importing a new king from Holland than any actual fighting. Britons do have some justification to complain, but on some metrics, like corruption, liberty and stable civic society, the UK still ranks relatively well. Now, some may feel this long tradition of free speech is under threat these days, with the police seemingly a bit more enthusiastic about checking tweets, placards and WhatsApp messages when catching the common thief. But in terms of historical and international comparison, it is still pretty good, and maybe we'll get better in the next few years. Another lucky legacy for the British is the English language. Teaching English to foreign students is a booming business. The UK benefits from English as a global language, and English literature has been a major export, from Shakespeare to Tolkien and Harry Potter. The Premier League is another huge global export. It's the richest football league in the world and getting richer every year. 6.3 billion in 2023 to 24. Now, 80% of managers, 75% of owners and 66% of players are foreigners. But at least it is the English supporter which gets to pay the ever-rising ticket prices to watch the games in the flesh. The UK is also a global leader in offshore wind. It built the world's second floating offshore wind farm. It has the second highest offshore wind generation after China. It's just a bit of a shame the broken UK energy market with one national price means the UK wasted 655 million this year in paying wind farms to turn off wind and buy electricity from gas-powered station. It seems you can have too much of a good thing. Hopefully that will get fixed soon. Another undeniable strength of the UK economy is the finance sector, mostly based in London. The financial sector is worth 281 billion and in 2023 had a trade surplus of 73.2 billion pounds. That's a huge surplus. The industry paid 110 billion of taxes, making up 9% of government receipts. Now, it's not without its drawbacks. You could argue a bit of money laundering, inequality rising, asset prices. It is some problems of relying too much on finance. And since Brexit, London has lost some jobs to Europe, and increasingly firms are wanting to list on the New York Stock Exchange rather than London. But nevertheless, for better or for ill, the finance sector is a critical part of the UK economy. So the UK still produces a few good things, and many of the real success stories don't hit the headlines. We tend to dominate on the factories closing down rather than the smaller startups setting up. And also you could add many more things to what we've said in this video. Scottish whisky, cricket, Wimbledon, Edinburgh Festival, computer games, oil, tourism and so on. But even when you do set out to look for a more optimistic angle on the UK economy, you can't help but be reminded of a few missed opportunities and could do better. But anyway, hopefully this isn't quite as pessimistic as the average video from Economics Help. There are some strengths to the UK economy. I'm certainly not thinking of moving. Anyway, leave me your comments in the comment section.